Hello, everyone. People are still joining the Zoom, but some of us are in person at NYU. And good morning or good night, good evening. I'm Margaret Scott. I'm with the New York Southeast Asian Network, and I'm thrilled to be here with Felix Nesi, a novelist who is going to talk about his novel with Laura Norgaard, who also knows a great deal about Indonesian literature. And I will introduce them both after I let a couple more people join us. And before that, I'd like to plug the New York Southeast Asian Network and also thank the Asian American Writers Workshop for co-sponsoring this event. And I encourage everyone to subscribe to our newsletter at nysean.org. You can see how to subscribe to the newsletter. It's a weekly newsletter during the academic year, and it will put you in touch. It's become quite a hub for things that are happening in the United States, especially on the Eastern Seaboard, about Southeast Asia. And for instance, coming up on the 19th of May, Cleo Kalumbahi will be a timely talk on what the Monday's elections in the Philippines mean. That's an event that we are publicizing, and also Maria Ressa will be speaking also about the elections at Harvard on the 20th, I believe. But if you go to our website, you will get the exact information. Yeah, the 20th. So we hope that you will all subscribe and also become members of the New York Southeast Asian Network. And now I think I will welcome today's events. It's really nice to be in person with you both, and thank you for making the effort to come. Felix Nesi has written a book that has a long English title, and we're going to be talking about the English translation by John McGlynn. And it's on the night
of the World Cup finals and other unexpected matches in Timor.
Great. And it's the name of a fictional town in the Indonesian edition. And Felix grew up in a small town near the border between East and West Timor called Insana. He's now a writer in residence at the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa. And he was awarded an emerging writer designation at the Makassar International Writers Festival in 2015. He's published a collection of short stories, as well as this novel, which was awarded the prize for the best novel at the Jakarta Arts Council by the Jakarta Arts Council in 2018. And we are very, very lucky to have Laura for the conversation with Felix. Laura was a loose scholar, and she spent the year at the Lontar Foundation in Jakarta, but she brings to it a particular point of view and expertise that she spends a lot of time now in her PhD program building on that expertise of looking at how memory and conflict and violence finds its way into literature. And she, in particular, is comparing Indonesia and Brazil, where she has a lot of experience in Brazil and now a lot of experience in Indonesia. She graduated from Princeton and she started an English language arts magazine, which focused on the memory of Brazil's civil military dictatorship. And then she was the editor for a word I can't pronounce.
Asymptote.
I don't know why I can't pronounce it. From 2017 to 2019, she's done a great deal of nonfiction reporting and essay writing about literature, including some wonderful publications about Felix novels. And now she's at Harvard working on her PhD. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to you for a conversation. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much, Margaret, for that really generous introduction. And thank you to the New York Southeast Asian Network and the Asian American Writers Workshop for making this conversation possible. And thank you, Felix, for being here. It's been a long time. The last time we saw each other was a pandemic ago in Jakarta.
Yeah. Right before I go to Netherlands, like 2019 something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been so
Yeah.
long, and so it's so nice to see you in
Yeah,
person. Yeah, and to be able to talk about your writing and also this excellent novel. I have here one of the early Indonesian editions, Orang Orang Utimu. This book is really powerful. It opens in a fictional town on the island of Timor in 1998. It's the World Cup final between Brazil and France.
Yeah.
Mhm. A bunch of men in the town are all gathered around in the police station to watch the World Cup final on the TV. And from that moment, in the next chapter, you actually go back several decades,
Yeah.
and you start narrating some of the most important and troublesome moments of Indonesia's recent history, like the mass violence against perceived communists under the Suharto dictatorship, and also the repression of independence struggles in East Timor, and how that inflected everyday life for so many different people through all of these different plot lines and characters. And there are a number of different ways in which this book, in my opinion, stands out in the landscape of contemporary Indonesian fiction. In some ways, I think it joins a number of other titles that have done really cool work on historical memory, and representing that in creative ways. I think this book has a lot in common with Eka Kurniawan's Cantik Itu Luka, or Beauty is a Wound, which narrates Indonesian history from Japanese occupation through the 70s from a small town in Java. It even has things in common with certain passages from Intan Padmadita's The Wandering, which also deals with that work of historical memory. But at the same time, it stands out in a number of ways. And one of the clearest ways is that you narrate Indonesian history not from the hegemonic cultural center of Java or Jakarta, but from the Eastern Islands, which are just, in terms of cultural production, underrepresented in the Indonesian literary scene, and especially in English translation. And then beyond that, you also bring this amazing narrative voice. And I think that that's what makes this book stand out, that it has humor and whimsy, despite the fact that you're also narrating such, powerful and troublesome moments. And before I start asking you questions and bringing you into this conversation, as I was trying to brainstorm how to introduce this book and really frame it for people who haven't had a chance to read it, since the English translation is still forthcoming, I kept on going back to an essay that you wrote, the essay that I translated for Asymptote Journal, about your process of composing it. And I just want to read two very short quotes, which I think frame two elements of this text really, really well. One is, you talk about how you first got interested in writing fiction. And you wrote, "In 4th grade, I almost got in a fight with Christo and Frid, two of my brothers, after they told me that the books I read so seriously by the light of the gas lantern were fiction. And fiction means that those books are filled with nonsense, that people make it all up, and that I was wasting my time reading all that junk. But once I managed to accept that those stories had been invented, I started to enjoy writing. When else would I be allowed to lie to people like that?" Fantastic. And then the second, on a slightly more somber note, the second piece that I want to bring to the table here is a teenager. You reflect on a teenager who's at a book event that you're doing on the island of Flores, asked you, how long did it take you to do all the research for this novel? Because it has so many historical events that come into play, and there's so many instances of state violence. Like, how long did it take to do that? And you answered, "I write about myself. In the face of so many wounds, I only needed research to finish up the story. For so long, we have known that something happened and continues to happen. We live in fear. We can feel hearts breaking, as when Yanti's father cried while hitting his daughter, or when Indonesian soldiers tell us that we should marry Javanese girls to better the Timorese race. We know something is happening. We just don't know what it is." So with that combination of sort of love for the storytelling elements of fiction, as well as these experiences of testimony that need to be shared, I will open the conversation to you. And I'm curious, how do you understand the current landscape of Indonesian fiction, and where does your work fit into it?
I don't really understand it. I mean, yeah, I don't really understand the landscape and everything. What I know is that there's the lack of story from eastern part of Indonesia, and I have to say that I'm kind of boring. Read all those Japanese books, like it's like same story after all. Like it's about Javanese, sometimes it's about Sumatra, and yeah, it's like maybe I have to write something interesting about eastern part of Indonesia. I read like Ayu Tami's book, and it's some line about East Timor. Yeah, Seno Bumi Raja Dharma wrote a book about Timor. Eka Kurniawan, I think he mentioned some lines in his novel about East Timor, but I think maybe I should write it down, write something about it. Yeah, I don't want to say thing, but it's I have to say that I just so bored with all of those stories, and I think I have to write something I like. Yeah, I like to read. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. I mean, you also, I mean, there's this element of the book that brings out a kind of a different storytelling tradition, I think, as well. There's a character in this novel, Siki, who is a storyteller, right?
yeah.
And he tells stories to, like, people come around, other characters in the book, to hear his stories. And even the third person narration as a whole sort of feels like it has a storytelling aspect of it. So what alternative, traditions of storytelling are you engaging that aren't those, Javanese, Sumatran stories?
Yeah. This kind of storytelling in Timor is I can't really explain, but it's like it's so with poetry on it, and with a great story. We have this every village, because we don't really have the writing tradition. It's just storytelling. So in every village there is always one or two people very good at storytelling. So people just come around his house and then sit there, and then he will start tell the stories. And I really like it because it's so much poetry there, like so much layer in its language, and then it's beautiful. When we go to a village, even if people just want to say goodbye, like "Hi, I'm going now," they will say it through the poem, I will go and don't look my back because there's some fortune there and there, and they just say each other, like one recite this poem and one other recite this, and it's beautiful. So maybe my writing is affected by that, I think. Yeah, in some ways.
I think so. I mean, I remember when we had that conversation in Jakarta a few years ago, I had come in saying, there's something about this third person narration that has this storyteller involved in it. And you mentioned that when you originally wrote the book, that there was a character, a narrator, who was a storyteller. You ended up editing it out, right? Yeah. What was the process like of turning those kinds of oral, traditions of storytelling into a written book?
There's a character that I don't remember. It's disappearing in which editing. It's I feel kind of like it's a little bit boring, because I have to say that's the story, and then come back to the character, and then say again the story, and then come back to the character. So yeah, it's disappearing somewhere. I can't remember.
Yeah. Well, I think the result is really good, and I'm curious more about. I mean, these are not like everyday stories that you're telling. I mean, in some ways they're everyday stories that you're telling, but also you have narratives about really important historical events that come through in this. And so, is that? I mean, in these traditions of storytelling that you're talking about, do people tell stories about violence of the state, about what Indonesian soldiers have done in Timor? Does that come up?
They will starting with the like some, what is it? Old story about the family, like uh, our ancestor is a frog, like a story like that, and then the frog is do something and then turn to human, and then you are the descendants of the
Mhm.
frog. So yeah, some stories like that, and then they will come to the stories about the war and then Indonesian soldier. But the thing is, they will talk about Indonesian soldier um, like the war between the Japanese and then the Dutch and then Indonesian, but they will talk it with the humor, with the humor. So even if the Indonesian soldier hear it, they will laugh. It's a fun story. It's not like we are talking about the miserable things happen, the saddest thing. And even they're talking about the communists, like they will talk all the stories, but they don't feel like they have to hide something, but because they told it with a fun way, and everyone will laugh. No one's offended by it, and yeah, it's good to it's good to hear. Like if you hear that, you know that it's not good. It's something wrong there, but everybody laugh. But everybody laugh, and yeah.
Mm.
So we started to know all of this story, but sometimes we don't realize that that's something wrong with that story. Like
Yeah, like it ends up sort of being normalized.
yeah, it's normalized.
Yeah. That makes I feel that combination of humor really strongly, like the humor and the dark events in your book. I remember this one passage when you introduce one Indonesian, or a character who becomes an Indonesian soldier, Linus. Yeah, and he decides that he wants to become an Indonesian soldier because he's climbing a palm tree to get a coconut, and a lizard scares him and he falls down, and then a bunch of other soldiers convince him to kill the lizard, because that's sort of how he can assert his masculinity in the face of this embarrassment. And so he kills the lizard, and in that moment he says, I want to become a soldier so that I can kill communists that are like this lizard. Which of course is, it leads to this really horrifying conclusion, and you kind of feel that punchline almost of the sad event at the end of this whimsical tale that you're kind of chuckling at. Do you think that in this novel, does that come through as, like, would you describe it as satire? Would you describe it as just what kind of humor do you think you're working with when it intersects with politics?
I don't really know. I will let the reader to decide it. But it's very good to tell the humor, like tell the sad things through the humor. If they can get it, then they have to get it. One thing about this character I have to say is that I have to edit. What is it? Indonesian soldier after 1965, like communist things. Everything is communized. Like if they have people, they will just it's communist. Even the independence war in East Timor, resistance, Sanana Gusmao and everything, they will just call it communist, and people will hate it because everyone hates communists.
Mhm.
And yeah, they will just start kill each other. Like if you call someone communist, it's okay to kill him. It's like yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense with the lizard moment. I mean, and that also comes through in other passages in your novel, like the character's language and way of seeing different things is inflected by that kind of state discourse. Like there's one character who tries to apply to get papers to be a migrant worker in Malaysia to help his daughter pay for school and have a better life, and he's facing the bureaucratic mess of applying for yeah. So you have this very funny passage where it's all about, okay, so in order to do this, I have to fill out document X with institution A, and then fill out like document Y2 to go to institution B. But in order to do that, I also need to, officially prove that I have a religion, because otherwise, I'm a communist and I'll be killed and imprisoned anyway. And it just goes on like that until the conclusion is too complicated. It's too hard for this guy to do. And so he just, decides to go illegally and then disappears from the story entirely. Yeah. So I think that comes through extremely well.
No one read that paragraph. Like my friends, like, oh, it's so boring. We have to read all the you read it and you're boring. You have to do it, and then you know what's boring is.
Yeah.
Even if you read it, you will be very bored.
Honestly, that was one of my favorite passages.
So like, don't do it. Just don't read it. It's like don't do the document. Just go. Let's just go.
Yeah, it's this long paragraph.
Long,
Everyone just skip over it.
Everyone just skips. So yeah, it's like the workers. They just skip the document. Like, it's so much document. Let's just go. Yeah. And then they never came back. Like in East Timor, in East Nusa Tenggara, in that province, it's like more than 100. Like in I work with them in 2019. It's like 200 or 300 people die in Malaysia. It's just in Malaysia. It's not like in some other country. And we have to send them back to East Nusa Tenggara with all this COVID, and it's so expensive and everything. Yeah, they will just go and because I'm sorry, I'm laughing.
That's great.
Because they go without document, it's very difficult to find them. Like we know that their name is Marcus, and then but their boss know that their name is Ahmad or because Japanese made the new ID, fake document, and so it's so difficult to find them, and then sometimes we if he's lucky enough, then they will call us. Oh, this one is dying. You have to. Sometimes they just bury them in Malaysia, and the 200, 300 number is just the bodies we receive. It's not count with the. So
I mean, and it's really wild, because that's something that if you're in Jakarta, if you're in Java, you don't really hear about at all. I don't, it's not something.
They have another problem, of course.
They
don't have that problem.
Yeah.
But I think in Java they have that problem too with the migrant workers.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really. They have.
Yeah. And how would you describe, I mean, with all of these different like intersecting layers of violence, right? Because you have something like the migrant work, which is layered on the bureaucracy of the state, and this possibility of being a communist, and the kind of violence that can come from that, which is then layered on the history of the violence that happened in the 60s and 70s. And I think your novel shows all of those different layers and how they connect through generations. How is the public discourse around the memory of all of these different periods of violence in Timor? Are people trying to bring these narratives to the surface right now, in beyond just the way it pops up in everyday conversation?
It's like never any problem. Like we have all that problem, but now we also have like COVID problem things, and sometimes people just forget about the event or all the problems, but we know that something happened. Like it's we can have a better life. It's like it's a miserable, but we can't solve that because we have another problem. Like the problem is because also with this COVID, the government is just saying don't go out, but they don't say how you can eat if you don't go out. Like because people, they don't have job. They just a farmer or the worker who just work today for eat tomorrow. And if they don't work today, they can't eat tomorrow. but the government is just like, don't go out, don't go out. People have to go out to work.
Right.
Like, it's okay to say that, but then tell them how you eat if you don't go out. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. You know, in this same essay that I read from when I was introducing your book, you mention how Gunawan Muhammad, an Indonesian author and very famous literary critic, had been at a festival in the Netherlands. And yeah.
Winternachten or something? Yeah.
Yes,
So,
thank you for saying it. I was like, I don't know how to pronounce that. And he said that literature and art cannot be built by anger, and then said that even though the Dutch army had shot his own father, that he doesn't write from a place of anger. Do you write from a place of anger? And if so, where do you think the place of anger is in literature?
I think yes, I really angry when I write my novel. It's like, yeah, in some way I think maybe that's how Gunawan Muhammad deal with his loss, like the Dutch killed his father, and then but they try to forgive them, and then they start to write. But I think I can't even forgive Indonesian for what they do in Timor. Like, they just came in 74 and then invade East Timor, and all the things they do in East Timor, people in West Timor have the suffering too, because they just take all of the men in the village and just go to war. They just sign them up, like let's go kill some communists. There's no communists in East Timor, of course. Yeah. And yeah, we have a lot of things. When I was a kid, my village, they use it to build a post. Like, there is a soldier everywhere, and they have this. They have right to do everything. Like, they can just punch you, and they can just. I am a kid, so I go where and there, but there's soldier everywhere. Like, we were scared of soldier. Sometimes they just call us, make fun of us, bullying, and yeah, if you they can just punch you, and no one will ask them why. Yeah, that's so much things happen, and then with this war, then start the militias. Militias are coming. They bring gun everywhere they go. They will just put the flag, red and white Indonesian flag. They will just tie it in the head or in their, and they just go everywhere with it. They have right to do anything because they're militias. They're patriots.
Right. What? So I mean, what's also striking? Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think that's why it's too much anger in me. Like every time I see, it's a joke between us. Like from my generation, from Timor, from West Timor. When you see soldier, run. You have to run. Soldier and police, and then when we came to Java to study, it's like we laugh sometimes because every time we see soldier, we just start to run. It's like it's so silly because they do nothing. Like even the soldiers is, what is it? Heran?
They're worried.
Heran.
Are they?
They're asking like, why you're running?
Oh, they're curious. Why? Yeah.
Why you're running? We're scared. We're scared of you, of course.
Yeah.
Like we know it deep in our heart, and when you see soldier, you have to run. That's what they do to our generation.
Yeah.
Like my generation, like the kid in 90s.
Yeah. I mean, what you know, you can feel that in your book. You can feel that kind of anger and that kind of just emotion that's coming through. You know, it's interesting. You could have written this as nonfiction testimony about these different experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why fiction? Why not nonfiction?
I was trying to write it that way, but I think it's not fun. Like I don't have fun with that. And I think my friends will hate it to read it. Like I know that I have to write it with some story, something they know they can what is it, they can click with it. They can relate to it, so they can read it, and then they know what's happening. Like we have so much anger, we have so much fear, but sometimes you don't know why. It's like, why have so much fear to the soldiers army? And yeah, I just chose the nonfiction. It's in the first draft. It's too many historical events there, even with the dates and something like that. And then I think I look it again, and my friends were so bored with all this dates. Like when we study history in high school, and it's so boring lesson for us. Yeah, the history is so boring. So yeah, I just add some story to it to all those events.
Yeah. I think that that's it's interesting that you made those changes for like your friends, for the readers who are just the people who are close to you, because I also think it has another consequence to it that's really, really cool, which is that I think someone who has no knowledge of Timor would easily be able to pick up this book and enjoy it, because you can read it as a series of stories, right? You have all of these different characters, you have their lives and their experiences, or you can read it thinking about the events that it sort of lines up with, but that it's not explicitly, it doesn't like explicitly say, this is the event that we're talking about and this is the date. And in that quality, I think it reminds me of I have a wonderful professor, Diana Sorensen, who speaks about Gabriel Garcia Marquez in Latin America as having that same kind of style of narration, where you can read 100 Years of Solitude as a book about Colombian history, or you can just read it as a set of stories. So I think that comes through as well. And I'm really curious, you have you have a structure here that's really interesting because of all of the intersecting stories. Did you write it as this kind of not like temporally non-linear book when you first sat down and wrote it, or did you write the plot lines like separately and then wove them together? How did you come up with the structure?
I work with the structure after that, like after all the story, and then I have to read it again and again and again. I have to rewrite it, and then I have to feel the the music in it. Like oh, it's too boring, I have to do it like this, and then all that kind. It takes some time to do it, and I think it's not fun things to do. I have fun writing, but when I do that, it's sometimes I give up. I just like, oh, I don't do these things again, because I have to write it and put the structure and feel the music in it. And it's a lot of things to do, I think, in that time.
It's a part of writing that's just hard work.
I'm glad you like the structure. You find it out.
I love that. I think it's also a way of narrating time that feels more like memory than history, right? It's like you don't remember in a linear way.
Sorry, I have to go back to because what you say about the history, about I write to my friends. I have to go back to your first question about the Indonesian landscape. I think when I write this, sometimes I feel like I write it to myself, and to my friends, because in Timor we always read books from Java, like we know all about Java in all the story. We know where Stasiun Gambir. We know what is train, because we don't have train in Europe. But then we like the story, but then we can relate to it. So when I write it, the motivation is to write something for me and for my friends, so we can read it and, oh wow, I know this place. This is how we make humor. This is our humor. Like we laugh for this, but we don't laugh for that joke, and then all of that. Yeah. So
yeah. I mean, I think that's also why it sounds so different than and like reads so differently than pretty much any other work of Indonesian literature that I've encountered. Like it goes far beyond just in this edition of the work. There's a little glossary at the beginning that has a number of different words in like Itun, other like local languages from Timor. But beyond that, it's like the entire structure of thought is moving in its own direction in a really cool way. So I was thinking, and we talked about how it would be nice to read from a section of the novel to give people a sense of how this book works, right? Yeah, so I was thinking we selected a passage from the first chapter. So we have that scene of everyone gathered around watching the World Cup. That's really powerful, and maybe you could read a paragraph or two from the passage in Indonesian so people can hear how it sounds in your voice, and then I'll read from John McGlynn's translation.
okay. Okay, this is from page 5. Antara iri dan patah hati, mulailah anak-anak itu minum-minum. Televisi masih menyiarkan 2 komentator bola dengan jas kuning yang selalu mengepalkan tangan dan mengucapkan salam olahraga setiap 30 detik. Martin Kabiti, para tetua, guru, dan 2 orang tentara lain minum dengan tenang, dan sesekali mereka bersandar sambil memejamkan mata menikmati minuman itu. Anak-anak muda minum seperti orang kehausan. Mereka menenggak whisky 1 gelas penuh, menggantinya dengan sopi kepala, menuang lagi bir, mengganti dengan anggur, sehingga tak lama berselang mereka telah mabuk dan menjadi gaduh. Mereka menertawakan sesuatu yang tidak lucu dan suara mereka menjadi keras menyaingi komentator bola. Namun begitu pertandingan dimulai, mereka menjadi hening dan tak seorang pun yang bersuara keras.
So good. It's a hard act to follow. So I'll read from a little bit longer in the English, so people can get a sense of how this sounds. Envious and brokenhearted, the young men began to drink. On the television, 2 commentators in yellow jackets were raising their fists and shouting, "Long live soccer," every 30 seconds. Martin Kabiti, the elders, the teachers, and the 2 soldiers drank calmly, sometimes leaning back and squeezing their eyes shut to better savor their drinks. The younger men, however, drank like they were dying of thirst. They downed full glasses of whiskey, then sopi kepala, then beer, and then wine, so that in a very short time they were drunk and rowdy, laughing at things that weren't very funny and speaking in loud voices, as though to compete with the announcers. Even so, as soon as the match began, they fell silent and no one spoke another word. The match was not at all what they had expected. Their idol, Ronaldo Luis Nazario de Lima, seemed to have lost his fangs, and with his mouth agape and little teeth like those of a rat, he ran listlessly around the center of the field, just like a rat that had eaten poisonous beans. He displayed none of his usually brilliant maneuvers and flashed no broad smile after successfully upsetting an opponent like he used to. That night, there was no joy in watching soccer. All present braced themselves as they watched the screen, dreading the thought of the French squashing their favorite team. Nobody liked the French. The French were a team of players who rarely smiled and whose faces, when they did smile, resembled those of the Dutch who had once colonized their village. In the 27th minute of the game, their fears were realized when Zinedine Zidane, the bald French player the size of a horse, sank the ball into Brazil's net. The room grew restless as the spectators tried to figure out why Ronaldo looked like a poisoned rat. Had he neglected to pray beforehand? Had the French put a spell on him? Was he hungry? Atino and his gang carried out their work methodically and with no haste. They were certain they had plenty of time to do what they had come to do. Unbeknownst to them, however, on this night of the World Cup finals, Ronaldo had turned the match into an exercise of interest only for the French side and their supporters. The party at Sergeant Ipi's would not continue long after the match had ended. And when Zinedine Zidane scored a second goal shortly before the end of the first half, Martin Kabiti stood up, kicked his chair, and accused Ronaldo of engineering his team's defeat. Ronaldo was bribed. The US is behind this. Fucking dogs, Hukimai, your mother's cunt. This isn't a soccer match, it's a joke. With a stream of expletives and spittle splattering from his mouth and through his mustache as he jabbed his finger at the television, Martin ranted at greedy Americans, the devil behind all the sources of conflict on the face of the earth. With his fists doubled and ready to challenge America and its allies to a fight, none of the other men dared to argue. Take me home before I break this Ukimai television, he yelled at Sergeant Ipi. I bet your fucking breeches it was made in the USA. As Martin prepared to throw the heavy swivel chair on which he'd been sitting at the television, Sergeant Ipi scrambled outside and started his motorcycle. Not saying goodbye to anyone, Martin Ipi stomped behind him, shouldering his way through the drunk crowd and broken-hearted gaggle of young men. The entire party followed Martin to the motorbike, all of them muttering as well. Some seconded Martin's comments and swore at the US. Others waited until he had gone to argue over what he had said. After Sergeant Ipi and Martin Kabiti abruptly sped away on Ipi's motorcycle, the rest of the crowd at the police post quickly made ready to leave. With the host not having said anything before leaving, no one felt comfortable staying there. And then when the two soldiers got up from where they were seated on the sofa and slapped their backsides, the sound was like that of a bell signaling that time was up. Some of the younger men tried to persuade Masainal to let them continue to watch the match at his house, but most of the men just wanted to go home to bed. A soccer match with an ineffectual star player was simply not worth watching. One of the soldiers went to the television and turned it on. As the crowd milled from the house and onto the roadway, there were those who cursed the United States, which was behind all the messes in the world. There were those who cursed the policemen, who now threatened to terrorize them, even in their dreams. Now, when they dreamed of Sylvie, more likely than not, Sergeant Ipi would appear as well, a thought they found disgusting. One cooler-headed man rejected the claim that all the messes in the world were America's doing. The US, he said, was just a small country that thought itself to be a superpower. The messes of the world were a curse from heaven, brought down by demonstrations and protests against Suharto's rule. Everything used to be just fine, the man said before spitting out his used quip of Betel. Ever since people started to protest against Bapak Suharto and to demonstrate against the government, there has been one misfortune after another. I shouldn't have to tell you this, all right, but Bapak Suharto is a reincarnation of the ancient kings of Java. I swear, I once read that in the newspaper. The point is, God and all the ancestors support Suharto. So of course, when people protest, the world is going to get messed up. A much younger man rebuffed this idea and conjectured that if Suharto were really an incarnation of Javanese kings, then catastrophes would only happen in Java. Matters pertaining to Java and its kings should have no influence whatsoever on events in Timor, much less on Ronaldo in Brazil. It's just so good. I love the switch, the sort of like transition you have at the end of this passage where you suddenly, the US becomes so small in the imagination of everyone there. It's like, no, of course this isn't what's going on. What's going on is politics across Indonesia. And even though you see you have this optic on the whole world from Timor at the beginning of the passage, at the end you have this inverted scale of space and of the importance of events where it's Java and its relation to Timor that come into focus as the most relevant. So that's why I think it's
Thank you.
yeah. Oh, I thought it was fun that we chose to read this passage because now you're in the United States, the small country that thinks itself to be a superpower.
I forgot. I'm sorry.
No, it's perfect. That's what the so I'm curious, you're here at the Iowa writing program, and what has your experience been like so far? Are you getting material to write from your experiences here?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah. Um, when COVID-19 started, I go back to my village. Before that, I teach in the capital city of East Nusa Tenggara, Kupang, and I just drop my job there, and then I go back to my village because so many people in my village lost their job, my families lost their job. I have to go back, and then we built this alcohol business. We built this alcohol business. We made a hand sanitizer in the first 2 months of the COVID. And then people stop worrying about hand sanitizer and they just start to drink it. They even drink the hand sanitizer like 17% alcohol.
Oh my God.
They just drink it and they are very happy with that. And the business, in the first time I do that to help farmers. Like, I'm a writer, I have the obligation to do something to my tribes. And then I start to enjoy it. And for like 2-3 years, I don't read anything, I don't write anything. It's hard to write something when you run the business, like you're thinking about money, and the strategy and the business things. And then I came to Iowa, and then it's a very, very good thing for me. I started to sit down again, read and write, and it's a good program. I'm very grateful to be there. And we have this reading and all the workshop, and then sit down in my room and writing, and go to the tiny bar and say hi to another people. People are so nice, and it's when I think America is so rude. Everyone's around the world say that. I go to the Netherlands, and even if someone's shouting in the street, and they just it's Americans, and but I go to the bars, and everyone is like they're so nice. Everyone say hi, do the small talk, and then made some friends. It's a good time for me. 3 months, yeah.
That's great to hear. And I'm curious about your business actually, because I remember you telling me years ago, before you started this business, that Soapy, like palm wine, right? Is like
pound,
it's like it has a place in storytelling in Timor. Can you tell me more about that?
So I told you about the I told you before that some old people just do the story like your ancestor is a frog, and some tribe, like they will tell their kid that your ancestor is a palm, and then now they have to take care of all the palms, make soapy, the alcohol from it, and then sell it. And that the traditional alcohol is kind of a sacred drink there, because it used every time we do the praying, traditional praying. In Timor, people are Catholic, but they also still do the traditional rituals and things. So we use soapy every day, and it's a sacred drink. And
that's okay. We can come back to it if you want. So storytelling. Well, we'll get. I mean, well, and it's interesting because you also had another book come out. If I'm not mistaken.
Sorry. What if it's I wrote it in some paragraph about it in my novel, and also my grandfather falling down from the palm tree, and he died because of that. It's I'm working on another another novel about the alcohol. I started it before COVID, and then COVID, and then I stopped it. But I have so many materials here. Also in Iowa, I go to the Cedar Ridge Distillery. Yeah, because they write in their website that we let the mother nature do the things about the whiskey, because you know the winter in Iowa, it's like so, what is it,
Cold, hot.
multipolar.
Yeah, bipolar.
Yeah,
bipolar.
it's multipolar or something. Yeah. And
very cold and then very hot.
yeah. So I talk with them about how you think the nature work with your alcohol. It's like, wow, finally it's like everywhere, like in Timor too. People, we do the alcohol, but we know that when we make the alcohol, we make it with the ancestors. Like if you drop something, if you drop a bottle and it's just, you just drop it by accident, people will not angry with you because they know that ancestor wanted drink. They just make you to drop it so they can drink it. Yeah, it's beautiful.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. I'm gonna feel that the next time I drop.
You have to feel that way so you don't really feel bad about it.
Exactly.
Your ancestor in the ground.
Yeah.
They just want to give me something. Give me something. So you just drop it by accident.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
I love that. You also, despite taking a break from writing, you had time to publish a book of poems.
Oh yeah.
Kita pernah saling.
Yeah. It published 2021.
Yes.
Because I do all the business, but I feel so unproductive. And then I started to write again my poem. Like I wrote poems since I was a kid, but I just picked some poems from 2008, and then 2008, 2009 until 2019. Yeah, and then we published it. Yeah.
From what I know of that collection, it mixes love poems with very real social critique. Yeah. How do you think those poems and that new collection relates to Orang-Orang Mutumu? Does that come from the same impulse from really different places?
Yeah. I think like in Orang-Orang Mutumu, I wrote about Timor in a form of novel, but then I wrote another form in the poem, like because we have, I don't know, I think someone have to work on it. Like traditional poems that I mentioned to you, the structure is very good. Sometimes we just have to translate it literally to Indonesian. It's very good. It feels very good. But then it's not too good because it has the layer and things. But if someone just translates it to Indonesia, it's good because the structure too, the language structure is different from Indonesia, from Indonesian language structure. So I think some story I wrote it in the form of poem, like in 2014, 2015, 16. Yeah, I wrote so many poems.
Yeah. That interior translation is also an interesting part of it, where you go from different language. Which language do you usually compose them in verbally?
It's web method. Web method, and because we have in Timor sometimes different tribe and then different language.
And moving that into Indonesian.
It's good. Yeah,
you're a translator as well as a writer.
No. Sometimes I do that, like translating all poem or traditional poem to Indonesia. But I think Indonesian language is, or let's say just web method language is so rich, So sometimes there's word we can translate it to Indonesian. And it's like we translate it and no, it's not like this. We have to do something about it. And some friends like we can't. Indonesian language is so poor. Yeah, we can do that with. But maybe one day someone will do that.
Translating. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and I think that Indonesian as a language becomes rich through engaging all of
Yeah,
the other
engaging all
languages.
of the, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a final question before we move to the Q&A, I'd love to hear about who you're reading right now. What books have struck you as a reader?
Right now I don't really read novels, fiction. I'm translating a history book from it's written by the former what is it, controller in Timor, Dutch controller. Yeah, and he became a professor in Universitas Leiden. Herman Schultenort. Yeah, he has this like 500 pages of book about Timor, and I try to translate it. It's very good. Something I have to add is I wrote in the story that the people say that I read it in newspaper. I read it in people there stop believing all the storytelling. So they just believe all the writing narrative. So if you say I write it on the book, and then they say it's true, they stop believe it's I think it's some colonialist thing. Like it has to be right, and then people
it becomes
believe
true.
It becomes true. If it's not right, then it's not true. Yeah, it's sad, but
yeah, that's what I think your work is. There is that element of satire that comes through because you see the absurdity of that when someone is saying that it's because Suharto is descendant of Javanese.
So I just tried to translate it and to write it down. So someone really write it down.
It's written.
You have to read it. It's written.
Well, with that, I'd love to open to some of the questions. Yeah.
So I'll roll back down into the screen, and we have quite a few questions. I'd like to start with just many of the people I hope have been able to read Indonesian to read your great novel. I luckily have been able to read it in English, but it hasn't been published yet. So I'm wondering if we might just back up a little and talk a little bit about the story, because as the passage you read shows that it's got this wonderful layering. So there's Timor, there's Suharto, there's Indonesia, there's the military, then there's the broader world and the US. You do this very, very well of moving in and out. Because the sweep of the novel, for those who haven't read it, actually starts with what happened in Portugal that led to the independence attempts, and then the war, and then the Indonesian invasion, through an incredibly rich and powerful story of the mother of Sergeant Ipi. And then you go on and on and on. And I'd like you to just give a little bit of how you decided to tell that story that way. And one element of the story that I found very rich that I'd like you to then talk about is the role of the church and religion, which we haven't discussed yet.
Yeah. When I think about Timor, about my writing, it's like, for the first time, it's like a small idea about some what is it? Cow thieves, the thieves. Come to my village, and then the story goes, and I think this is we have this complicated history of colonialism, and then I came to read just one part of it. Like when I think about this, I have to think about the Netherlands, about the Dutch. I have to think about the Portuguese. I even have to think about the US, and everything is just mixed there. And sometimes it's been complicated, but yeah, it's a rich story to find like, oh no, it's not your fault. Something there happened, and and then about the church. Church becomes so powerful in West Timor, especially Christianity, Protestant in the western side, and then Catholic becomes so powerful in eastern part. They they can even choose who become the wali kota.
Like the head, like the district.
Yeah, the
Yes,
head
sir.
of the district. Yeah, they can do that. It's they have everything. And sometimes I still have fight with them. Like I do so many. I criticize them. I criticize them because it's like they with all of that power, they do nothing. Like they do not. They even they even what is it, work with, sometimes they receive this fancy car from the, we know that it's a corrupt government and anything, and yeah, it's like you have this power, why don't you do something. Yeah, but
And not only do you have a critical eye at the power of the church and perhaps often abuses of the church, but
yeah.
the sexual element of the power of priests
Yeah.
sometimes is something that's important in the book. And why did you decide to highlight that?
When I in the first time, my novel, I don't write about that in my novel. I write about something else. I can't remember. But then some other part. But then I meet this. I want to do an interview with someone, and then I know that this an old guy. And when we do the talking, I know that he has a daughter. He has to send his daughter out of the town to the smaller village, because a priest get her pregnant, but everyone blame the girl, and then they just send this girl out of the town and give birth, and then disperse. They do nothing with him. He's because he has so many power, like so many people like him. He's like a favorite priest there, but then a girl has to raise his kid in another village, and every time someone talk about it, they just blame the girl. So yeah, so I think
That theme, you're not judgmental, and sometimes it's even done with a lot of humor, but it's a very rich theme in your novels.
yeah.
So the first question I'm going to go to is Aldi Pianto. Where can we purchase the Indonesian version of Orang Orang Tini? Is it possible to purchase the Indonesian version in the United States?
Oh yeah. That's a website, I think, Martin.
Yeah, Margin Kiri is the publisher.
Say it slowly.
Margin Kiri, like left margin in Indonesian.
Margin Kini.
Kiri.
Kiri. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah. And that's MARJIN space KIRI. And you can access it on their website. And if you have any trouble getting it sent to where you are, you can get in touch with the publisher and they will find a way. Yeah.
Maybe just get in touch with us and then
exactly.
figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I hope that answers your question. And here's a question from Dayan Dewi. I'm a Javanese Indonesian American. The privilege of being a Javanese was a new information for me. I write and paint to express my thoughts. Do you have any tips for me so I can represent Indonesia and be aware of my bias as a Javanese, so in my work I can consciously avoid this bias? Thank you.
That's a hard question. I think maybe sometimes, I don't know. I just told my like Japanese friends that sometimes they have to read something outside of Java, or like because Indonesia have this big newspaper and they control everything. Like if something happened in Papua or in Timor, it's Indonesian journalists will write it, and when we write it in the newspaper, it will be Indonesian point of view. So So even if the soldiers killing someone in Papua, they will just write it in the Indonesian point of view, like, yeah, they will just blame the Papuans. So it's a little bit difficult, but yeah, if they try to understand the other part of Indonesia, like read something differently from different side, maybe it will help. But Java also has so many problems, I think, like the little people in Java, they have so many problems with this sanitasi, with the
Like
sanitation,
sanitation, yeah.
sanitation, and with the what is it?
Displacement.
Displacement and thing. Yeah, Japanese itself has to do something about it. They have, yeah, it's so much problem there.
Yeah, I think that you know, a lot of times the problem is the Javanese perspective takes the role of representing the whole, but really like the Javanese perspective represents the Javanese perspective, which is one of many. Yeah.
I just have this discussion with some friends from Timor. They live here in Minnesota, something, and then it's strange because we have this conclusion that it's easy to live as Timorese people in America than to live as Timorese people in Java. It's so hard, like with the, I think, the racist thing. We have to be honest that in Java the racist is so big. Like maybe here people are facing it with other kind of color and other kind of race, but in Java it's difficult to be a student from Timor or even from Papua to study in Java. The first thing we have to face is the racist thing, but we never discuss about it in Indonesia. Yeah, 2-3 days ago we just discussed with friends. Yeah. Oh, you feel that?
Yeah.
Why do you think it's not discussed?
I think maybe it's not the time yet, or maybe they never put it on the table to discuss. Like people is just no, we don't do that, but we feel it. It's like yeah, it's a big problem there. 2-3 years ago, some Papuans is called monkey by the soldier, and then the problem is they never solve it. Like they never discuss this term of monkey and all the racist thing. In that time, I think, oh, maybe it's time to discuss about the racist things in Java, but then it's just disappear like that. They never discuss it.
So Dion Dewi has written another question. It's similar ground of her one in English, but she wrote it in Bahasa Indonesia, and I'm going to give it to Laura in a minute. But first, Timothy Ravis thanks you very much, and he was wondering if you had read Orang Orang Bloomington, and if so, A, if it was an influence. The title makes it seem plausible that it might have been an influence. And B, if his time in Iowa has changed his feelings about the book, if he's read it. Do you know the book Orang Orang Bloomington?
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't
How
read
interesting.
about it.
You may have to find out about it, Timothy Ravis. Tell us more.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go to Sydney Jones asked a question, which actually she also has read your book, and we seem to have thought in a similar way. But her is the two institutions that appear as largely negative influences in your book are the military and the church, both outsiders that inflict different kinds of harm, with women as the frequent victims of both. Is that a fair conclusion? How do you see the role of the church? And she says she loved the book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, as I said before, church did nothing, so I don't know what the role. They just made. Sometimes I think, or maybe I'm too pessimistic, but I think church has a big power, and they can do something. But until now, I always say to them that you have to do something about the people, the social life and things. they do nothing. They just collect money and build a bigger church, and then they even make this. This is always bothering me. Like they collect
Like they collect visits. Yeah.
but it's like obligation money. So it's like people have to do it if they like. It's not like you have to say that if you work in the government,
Tithing,
if you work in government, you give us 2 million rupiahs. If you are a widow, you give us 10,000 rupiah something per month, and it's so annoying. It's like people have to give if they
So do you see that, Dion Dewi?
Yes, thank you, Dian Dewi. Felix, bagaimana pendapat Anda ketika Anda mengetahui bahwa novel Anda diterjemahkan ke bahasa lain? Saya orang Jawa Indonesia tinggal di Amerika, namun saya merasa nyaman dengan menulis dalam bahasa Inggris. Saya merasa bahasa Indonesia tidak cukup untuk menggambarkan cerita yang ingin saya tulis. Apakah Anda merasa bahasa Indonesia memadai untuk cerita-cerita yang Anda tulis? So just to translate for those who don't speak Indonesian, there were 2 questions here. One about Felix's opinion about having his novel translated into another language, and then also a question about whether or not Felix, you feel that Bahasa Indonesia is sort of enough to narrate the stories that you want to tell.
I live with Bahasa Indonesia, so I think Bahasa Indonesia is kind of my mother tongue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because my mother they don't teach me traditional English when I was a kid. They are embarrassed with the language because of that thing. People keep saying that, oh, that's not a good language. And then I think Bahasa Indonesia is enough to express myself. I think I was so close with Bahasa Indonesia. I read so many things in Bahasa since I was a child. So sometimes another word, I know the word to express these feelings. Even if I don't know, I will know it, and I will check it in the dictionary, and it's there. I think I know the feeling. I know the feeling of the language. If Dian maybe if she grow here in America, so maybe she's more used to English, or I think the language. Sometimes if I can't express something in Indonesia, I have this Timor slang. Timor slang to express things, and then because I live with that, so I think it's not a problem.
So there's another question on language. You had mentioned earlier that some words are not translatable, that you couldn't find an appropriate way of saying it in Bahasa Indonesia. Can you give more examples, or even the word you were thinking of earlier, and how does that work when Bahasa Indonesia doesn't have a word?
It's more like the frasa in traditional language. It's very, very hard to translate. It's like the poem in. It's very hard for me to switch language.
Tricky.
You've got many languages going on here.
Maybe just that. Sometimes the simple example is the curse words. Timor has this rich way to curse people, and then Indonesia don't have that word. So sometimes I just read the curse in traditional language or in Timor slang language. But because beside the traditional language, there's a Timor slang language. All the tribes know about it. but there is traditional language, different each tribes, and yeah, it's so much.
When you say Timorese slang, is that sort of a lingua franca between the different language groups in Timor?
Yeah, it's a language group, and Indonesian language mixed with the traditional language in Timor. So yeah.
And do you write originally in?
In Indonesia, of course, it's national language, because when we are in elementary school, in high school, the traditional language or the slang language is prohibited. Yeah, we can say that. As small kids, like in the first year of elementary, they get beat, get hit because they speak with traditional, because they are not nationalists enough. You have to be nationalist. Speak in Indonesia. Speak Indonesian language.
There's another comment from Aldi Rianto. There were definite Java-centric biases in Indonesia, at least when I left 20 or so years ago, including anti-Chinese ethnic bias. It was very problematic, and it sounds like it's still there. You talked a little bit about the horrible incident with Papuan students.
Yeah.
Can you expand it to what you think the state of play is on prejudice and equality on a scale in Indonesia?
Yeah, it's complicated, I think. Also with the problem with the I think every minority race have problem there. People, maybe their problem is not the races, maybe, but the differences. Like they don't really like it if you are, yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, it's too complicated for me with all this.
This is a ridiculously simplistic question, but what are your feelings about being an Indonesian? Do you feel straightforwardly, of course, I'm an Indonesian, or is that even a complicated answer?
Sometimes yes, but sometimes no. It's like, or maybe it's just about the culture, because Indonesia have this center kind of country. I think they try to centralize all of things, like to be Javanese, and everything we read and even everything we eat, they have this. Suharto made this racisation in 60. So
right about this.
Rice. What is that? Rice. So everyone has to eat rice. But Timorese, of course, we don't have this big farm with rice field, because we eat corn and then cassava and things. But then people start to leave this other food, because it's rice season. I think these little things has impact in this COVID. Like people become what is it? Bergantung.
They like switch between, or
They depend on rice from Java. And then when COVID came, if there's no rice, they don't eat, because they stop eating corn. If they eat corn, it's just like recreational food. It's not like they
not like a staple.
It's not a stable food. So yeah, maybe if they don't do that, they just let Timorese eat cassava, Papuans eat sagu. Yeah, we don't have this big problem when COVID, because everyone has their food.
Interesting. What are the chances of the English publication? Do you have any news on that, or it's up to?
Not yet. Maybe we have to wait a little bit more.
I hope it's soon. Any other questions?
No, not on my end. Thank you so much.
Anything else we didn't touch on that you'd like to comment on?
Not really. No, I think I'm good.
Well, thank you both very, very much. And thank you to our audience and thank you for all the questions. And it was great to have you here. Thanks.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
with that, we're going to say goodbye.
Thank you for joining us.